Imagine being a chill former chemistry professor turned Minister of Environment, minding your own business, when you're suddenly the president of South Korea. Sounds like the plot of a wild action flick, right? Well, that's Park Moo-jin's life in Designated Survivor 60 Days. This dude goes from mixing chemicals to mixing it up in the political arena after a massive explosion wipes out the government. Talk about a career change. And here I am struggling to change my bed sheets more than once a month. But hey, if a nerdy scientist can step up to lead a nation, maybe there's hope for the rest of us overthinkers who can't decide what to order for dinner without having an existential crisis. So let's dive into the roller coaster ride that is Park Moo-jin's accidental presidency and see how this reluctant leader manages to keep his cool, or at least tries to, while the world around him is going up in flames. One day, the South Korean government decides to play a real-life game of Who's Still Standing. A massive explosion wipes out the president and all the high-ranking officials during a State of the Union address. Guess who's the highest-ranking dude left? Yep, our boy Moo-jin. He's suddenly the acting president for the next 60 days. Talk about a career curveball. Now, Moo-jin's thrown into the deep end of a political shark tank. He's got military hotheads barking orders, political vultures circling, and a nation in chaos. The dude's legs are shaking like a freshman giving a presentation, but he stands his ground. He even fires a defiant general, showing he's got more backbone than anyone gave him credit for. But it's not all about flexing authority. Moo-jin's got a heart. When he sends soldiers on a risky mission to Cambodia, he doesn't just issue orders and call it a day. He's up all night, sweating bullets over their safety. When the major doesn't make it back, Moo-jin's wrecked with guilt, questioning his decisions and the cost of leadership. Throughout his 60-day crash course in leadership, Moo-jin grapples with the murky waters of politics. He's got opposition leaders setting traps, media sharks smelling blood, and a conspiracy that makes the X-Files look like a bedtime story. Yet, he sticks to his guns, pushing for honesty and transparency even when it might sink his ship. His relationship with his wife is his anchor. She's the unsung hero, offering support and wisdom when he's drowning in doubt. Their bond is a rare beacon of stability in the storm of political chaos. By the end of his term, Moo-jin's transformation is nothing short of epic. He steps down, not clinging to power, but ready to return to his life as a humble professor. If life ever made me president, this country would be in absolute flames within hours. Not even a full day, hours. But somehow, Park Moo-jin, a dude who probably has a student discount even though he's a professor, gets catapulted into the highest office in South Korea and actually pulls it off. Not flawlessly, not easily, and certainly not without trauma, but that's what makes his journey so damn gripping. This man isn't a hero in the way traditional political dramas like to frame their protagonists. He's not a Machiavellian genius who manipulates his way to victory, nor is he a natural-born leader with a rousing speech for every crisis. He's just a guy who tries his best, panics internally, and somehow doesn't let the country burn down. But the more you watch, the more you realize his journey isn't just about leading a nation. It's about not losing himself in the process. It's about integrity, control, imposter syndrome, and making choices that fundamentally change who he is, whether he likes it or not. Look, if you've ever had a mental breakdown in the snack aisle because there were too many flavors of chips, you already understand 0.00001% of what Moo-jin goes through every single second of his presidency. Except instead of choosing between BBQ and sour cream and onion, he's deciding who lives and dies, whether a war breaks out, and whether democracy survives or crumbles under his watch. No big deal. His anxiety doesn't just show in his hesitation, it's in his entire body language. The way he rubs his temples, how his eyes dart around the room when he's faced with a loaded question, the way his fingers clench when he's trying to suppress the urge to freak out. It's all there. One of the most intense moments is when he has to send a military unit on a mission, knowing some of them won't make it back. The weight of it crushes him. That's what makes him different from career politicians. Most of them make choices based on optics, but Moo-jin makes them knowing that real people suffer for his decisions. The thing is, he never fully adjusts to it. Even after 60 days, making those choices still eats at him. He's not the guy who toughens up and learns to sleep at night. He stays the same man who cares too much, and that's both his biggest strength and his biggest weakness. Moo-jin is the physical embodiment of every person who's ever walked into a job they weren't remotely qualified for and thought, surely any second now someone's going to realize I have no idea what I'm doing and escort me out. The only difference? His job is running an entire country. From day one, he doubts himself. He even tries to resign immediately. He assumes someone more qualified will take over because, let's face it, how the hell is a science professor supposed to run a nation in crisis? That's the equivalent of me and my cooking skills suddenly becoming head chef at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. The self-doubt never fully disappears, even as he starts proving himself. Even as he gains the respect of his team, he constantly questions whether he's the right guy for the job. Not out of cowardice, but because he's smart enough to know the full weight of the responsibility. The most dangerous people in power are the ones who never question themselves. Mugen isn't a weak leader. He's just self-aware enough to know that every decision could have irreversible consequences. That's why he leans on his advisors. That's why he listens instead of just commanding. That's what makes him better than all the political sharks trying to take him down. Mugen may be the president, but his wife is the only reason he doesn't combust into a pile of stress and self-loathing. Most political dramas turn the protagonist's spouse into either A, a power-hungry manipulator, or B, an ignored long-suffering partner who gets cheated on for extra drama. But his wife, she's his anchor. She knows exactly who he is. An honest, kind, sometimes ridiculously naive man who wants to do the right thing even if it destroys him. She doesn't try to push him into playing dirty, but she also doesn't coddle him. She reminds him that his fear of failure doesn't mean he's failing. She's also one of the few people who gets to see the full weight of his stress when he's not trying to hold it together for the cameras. When he looks like he hasn't slept in days and his shoulders are sagging under the pressure, she's there. She doesn't try to fix it because she knows she can't. She just reminds him that he's human. And sometimes when you're barely holding it together, that's all you need. If Mugen has one fatal flaw, it's that he thinks being right is enough. He believes in transparency, in honesty, in leading with integrity. That's what makes him a good man. But in a system where everyone else is playing dirty, he's an easy target. The political veterans eat guys like him for breakfast. They use his principles against him, manipulate his idealism, and paint him as weak because he refuses to play their games. And for a while, it works. One of the most frustrating things to watch is his constant underestimation of how ruthless politics really is. He assumes truth will prevail, but that's not how power works. It's not until later in the series that he realizes being a good person isn't enough. He has to adapt. Not by sacrificing his morals, but by understanding that survival sometimes means playing defense before your enemies attack. That's where his growth really shines. He learns, not to become corrupt, but to be strategic. He figures out how to outmaneuver his opponents without compromising who he is. And when he finally does start playing the game on his own terms, it's one of the most satisfying moments of the entire show. By the time Mugen reaches the end of his 60-day presidency, he's not the same person who walked into the Blue House on day one. He's still himself, still honest, still idealistic, but he's also harder. He's seen how power corrupts. He's seen how easily good intentions get twisted. He's had to make choices that haunt him. And then comes the final decision. Does he stay in power? Does he let himself become part of the very system that almost crushed him? Or does he walk away? He chooses to leave. Because at the end of the day, Park Mu-jin was never meant to be a politician. And honestly, that's exactly why he was the best one they ever had. Look, if you ever had an anxiety attack just thinking about answering a phone call, try to imagine the psychological nightmare of being forced to run an entire country with zero preparation. Every second, every decision, every breath. I don't care how stable you think you are, this would break anyone. The human brain isn't built to handle this kind of pressure. Park Mu-jin isn't just thrown into the deep end. He's thrown into an ocean filled with political sharks, military hawks, and morally bankrupt power players, all while trying to do the right thing and not have a full-blown existential crisis on national television. The dude survives, barely. But what does that do to a person? What does it mean to be trapped in a position of ultimate responsibility while knowing you were never supposed to be there in the first place? This is where we talk about what happened to Mu-jin's brain during those 60 days. One of the first things that happens to Mu-jin psychologically is paranoia. And honestly, he has every reason to be paranoid. In the beginning, he still operates under the assumption that logic and reason matter. Poor innocent man. He doesn't immediately suspect every smiling politician of plotting his downfall. He doesn't assume every piece of advice is a trap wrapped in a bow. But paranoia is necessary for survival in politics. It's not a symptom of an unhealthy mind, it's a required adaptation. The second he stops trusting people at face value is the second he actually starts to survive the game. A man who never wanted power in the first place is now constantly looking over his shoulder, analyzing every conversation for deception, questioning everyone's motives, including his own team. He doesn't sleep properly, he barely eats, his mind is in a permanent state of high alert. And the worst part, he can't talk about it. He can't even tell the people closest to him how much this is rotting him from the inside because that would show weakness. Imagine living like that. Imagine feeling like every person around you is either lying, scheming, or waiting for you to mess up so they can take you down. That's not leadership. That's psychological warfare. Even when he's right to be paranoid, he hates himself for it because he doesn't want to be that guy. He doesn't want to see the worst in people, but he has to if he wants to make it out alive. Let's talk about guilt because this show is great at making Moojin suffer through it. From the moment he steps into office, he's haunted by the weight of every decision. The most obvious example? I keep coming back to this, but the Cambodian military operation. He signs off on it knowing there's no such thing as a 100% safe mission. But when a soldier doesn't make it back, he takes it personally. He spends nights wondering if he could have made a different call. And that's the worst part about leadership at this level. Every choice leaves a body behind. No matter how careful, how strategic, how well-intentioned he is, someone always suffers because of his decision. He starts taking on other people's deaths as his own. And it's not just soldiers. It's civilians caught in government failures, victims of corruption, people who fall through the cracks of the system. By the time his term is almost up, his guilt is suffocating. His body physically sags under it. He doesn't smile the way he used to. He stops talking about anything outside of work because his entire existence has become a cycle of stress, guilt, and more stress. At one point, you can see it in his face. He knows he'll never be the same again. The weight of power isn't just stressful, it rewires you. You become a different person, and sometimes, you don't even realize how much of yourself you've lost until it's too late. You ever been in a situation where you are the only person taking something seriously? Like a group project where everyone else slacked off and suddenly it was your responsibility to pull everything together? Multiply that by 1,000,000. Moojin's isolation is one of the most brutal aspects of his experience. Yes, he has a team. Yes, he has advisors. But at the end of the day, nobody else carries the full responsibility the way he does. Even in moments where people try to help him, they can only do so much. His wife supports him emotionally, but she can't take away the stress. His team works tirelessly, but they're not the ones making the final call that could ruin lives. Nobody else feels what he feels. And the scariest part? He starts getting used to it. He starts holding his pain inward because he convinces himself nobody else will understand. That's how isolation really works. It doesn't start with pushing people away. It starts with believing they won't get it anyway, so why even bother trying to explain? And once you reach that point, you're alone, even in a room full of people. Moojin never has a moment to fully break. Even when he's at his lowest, even when he looks like he's about to pass out from stress, he doesn't get to lose it. Because if he does, people will see. And if they see, they'll use it against him. There's this moment where he almost lets himself crack, but then he shoves it back down because he has to. That's the real cost of leadership. It's not just making decisions. It's not just handling crisis. It's the fact that you're not allowed to be human anymore. And by the time his presidency is over, you can see what it's done to him. He's still standing, but he's exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep will fix. He's done everything right. He's survived. He's kept his integrity intact. But at what cost? That's the question the show never fully answers, and honestly, that's the scariest part. Because even though we get to turn off the TV and move on, Moojin has to live with it forever. After everything Park Moojin goes through in Designated Survivor 60 Days, after all the sleepless nights, the moral dilemmas, the paranoia, the guilt, the political shark-infested waters, there's one question that sticks with me. When you go through something that completely rewires your brain, how much of yourself do you actually get back once it's over? Think about it. Moojin didn't want power. He didn't seek it. He got shoved into it, barely survived, and then walked away from it. But does that mean he just snaps back to normal? Can you go back to being a regular person after carrying the weight of an entire nation's survival on your shoulders? Let's break it down. Mugen spends every waking moment of those 60 days trying not to become a politician. He actively rejects everything that makes people in power corrupt. He fights tooth and nail to keep his integrity intact. And he succeeds, mostly. But does that mean he leaves unchanged? Hell no. Trauma doesn't politely pack up and leave when the crisis is over. It doesn't go, oh my bad, I see you're done with this now, I'll just head out, have a nice day. No, it stays. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the way you react to stress, in the way your brain replays the worst decisions you have ever made at 3 a.m. like it's a director's cut of your worst nightmares. The Mugen who walks away at the end of the show isn't the same man who started this journey. He's still good, he's still moral, but there's a weight in his eyes that wasn't there before. And that's because power, real high-stakes, world-changing power, forces you to make choices that redefine who you are. You don't just go back to being a professor after that. You can't. So then the question is, if power changes you, then who are you once you let it go? Here's something nobody tells you about surviving hell. After it's over, you don't know what to do with yourself. It's like running a marathon where the finish line suddenly disappears. You're still running, still gasping for air, still expecting another crisis around every corner, but there's nothing there. Mugen spent 60 days fighting battles every single moment. Then one day, it's just done. No more late night security briefings, no more war rooms, no more backstabbing advisors or military threats or political conspiracies. He's just a regular dude again. Except he isn't. Because you don't go from making life and death calls every day to casually grading student papers without your brain screaming that something is wrong. The body doesn't know the difference between actual danger and expected danger. His nervous system is still locked and loaded for war. His wife sees it. His friends probably notice it. But nobody else will ever fully understand what he's been through. And that's the real tragedy of characters like Mugen. They do their job, they hold the line, they keep the world from burning, and then they have to figure out how to live a normal life again. That's not a transition. That's a psychological minefield. I don't think Mugen ever fully goes back to his old life, and honestly, I don't think he should. Because the truth is, after you've been through something that reshapes who you are, you don't have to force yourself to be the person you were before. You grow into someone new, someone who carries that experience but doesn't let it define them. And I hope that's what Mugen does. Because the alternative, letting the weight of everything he endured eat him alive, that's how you become a cautionary tale. That's how you become the guy who never stops living in survival mode even after the war is over. And this is the part where I get personal. Most of us have our own version of Mugen's journey. Maybe you've never run a country, unless there's something you want to tell me, Mr. Secret World Leader, but you've probably been through something that completely changed you. Something that made you look in the mirror and go, I don't even know who I am anymore. And the hardest part? Figuring out how to exist when the crisis is over. But here's the thing, you're not supposed to go back to who you were before. You take what you learned, you take the scars, the lessons, the pain, the victories, and you let them shape the next version of yourself. You don't erase it, you don't fight it, you build on it. Because the only way out of something like that is forward. So let me leave you with this. The real test of power isn't how you handle it when you have it. It's what you do when it's gone. Mugen walks away from the presidency because he knows he doesn't belong in politics. He's self-aware enough to recognize that staying in power for the wrong reasons would destroy him. But walking away doesn't erase what happened. So what does he do next? How does he live with everything he's seen, everything he's done? That's the question that lingers long after the show ends. And maybe that's the real message of Designated Survivor's 60 Days. It's not about surviving the political game. It's about surviving yourself after it's over. Thanks everyone for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. Also be sure to check out my other videos for more insight on other dramas and shows. Your support means a lot to me and it helps me grow this channel. If you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future videos, please drop them in the comments down below. Again, thank you for watching this video and I'll see you next time.